Hey, this is Derek Murphy. I want to make a short video as I'm preparing to write a short story, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how to write a short story. People have asked me this before. I generally write longer fantasy novels, so I don't have a lot of experience writing shorts, but I have finished at least three 15K prequels. So I'm going to talk about prequels to lead into a series, which is kind of what I'm doing, and also how to write a satisfying short story, what that includes, the things that you need to focus on. So this is just the process of me getting started to think about writing a story before I actually do it. I also posted a video recently on YouTube about pantsing versus plotting, the differences. Generally, I think it's a good idea to have a plan before you start writing instead of just figuring it out as you go. It's always going to be a little bit of a blend of both. The main difference is I have found plotters have a direction they want to go in, so plotting is like a map that helps them go in that direction, whereas pantsers are more about the experience and they enjoy not knowing where they're going to end up. And there's not really a one way to write, but in my experience, plotters have a better chance at getting somewhere that's going to be satisfying for readers because they did it on purpose. Pantsers also can do that really well sometimes, but there's more chances for it not to go the way that it should go, especially when, like, you can always write for yourself for your own enjoyment, that's fine. But when you're writing for other people or you're writing to submit a short for an anthology, which is what I'm doing now, you do need to consider who's going to be reading it and whether or not it passes the quality verification. I actually tried to make this video earlier and the video crashed on me, so I went back through and made some quick notes. So this video might be a little bit more structured. And like I said, these are very rough notes, but I'll tell you what I'm doing in the process and some of the things that I've started to think about. So this is a short for an anthology. What that means is a bunch of other authors are going to put together some genre-specific short stories that are going to be about 7,000 words together into an anthology. It can be a good opportunity to reach a new audience. It's probably a good idea to have something sort of related to a main series, or at least that, you know, attracts the right audience of your particular genre so that they know enough about your writing and can hopefully buy something else from you in the future. This is an urban fantasy short story anthology collection. What I need to do first is write 500 words, which is just the submission sample, and then based on the strength of that 500 words, if I'm approved, I'll write the full 7,000 words. Like I said, I tend to write shorts of about 15 or 20,000 words because I think, you know, if you're going to put something out there, you want to be pretty satisfying, like enough to sink your teeth into and hook readers' attention and get them wanting more. So I do this for if you have a series and you want to do a backstory or a prequel, then you want to be able to lead into the world or the environment of your main series without giving anything away, but you also don't want it to be so far disconnected from the main story plot that there's no reason to keep reading. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later because I did try to get this organized a little bit. So let me start here with number one, which is genre and title. This is urban fantasy. So urban fantasy is different from more epic fantasy because it's going to focus on more gritty scene, architectural details, real life, and then also it's going to have a lot more action and be a lot faster paced. So there will be vivid description, but there won't be long flowing description of the scenery or the backstory or the world building or anything. I've chosen Busted Faith. I thought about something. This is basically a fallen angel. I chose this particular story because this series has all the stuff that is popular in urban fantasy right now, which is fae and vampires and wolves and witches, basically a mix-up of all the supernatural stuff. You also want a fiery, strong protagonist. So I chose Busted Faith rather than something like Fallen Angels or, you know, something that's more romantic or more fantasy, because Busted is a little bit more edgy, a little bit more masculine. I think it'll fit a little bit better in urban fantasy. what you want to do when you're applying for an anthology is figure out who the coaches are, or the judges or the editors. Read some of their books so you know what the writing style is. Read some of the other, if you can, the other submissions or the other successful submissions. Other people might be saying, oh, I got accepted. You could ask to see their sample if they'll share it, or you could just go check out some of their books on Amazon to see their writing style, to see kind of what kind of writing is getting accepted into this anthology, because you do want to, match what the judges are looking for. I also started with a few short ideas that could serve as a blurb or a tagline that tries to hint at the chief conflict or story question. These aren't great. I'm going to have to redo these, but basically, the scene I'm working on in my main series, the protagonist doesn't know who her mother really was. She knew her mother was an angel warrior who died in battle, but that's really all she knows. So it's a little bit of a mystery, but not a huge mystery. I do need to figure out exactly what happens to her mother for the backstory, because eventually in book 2 or book 3, there's going to be a story reveal where she will know. So in this story, I'm going to focus on the mother's background story because it's a really strong character with a lot of drama, but I want to be careful not to reveal too much to take away the mystery of what happened. Ideally with a short, especially if it's a prequel leading into a main book, you can end on a cliffhanger and you can end on unresolved conflict. I'm getting ahead of myself again, but here basically her mother, the main character doesn't know this in my main series, but her mother story, she gets kicked out of these society of angel hunters. She's been fighting monsters and creatures her whole life. I said you've hunted for centuries. That's not exactly true because I don't think my angels live for centuries, so I have to fix that. But basically she gets turned out by her own kind, and now she has to seek refuge with the dark and dangerous creatures that she thinks are evil and have always hunted her. That's the setup for this story. So I kind of have sort of a title, sort of a chief conflict, and now I'm exploring, what's actually going to happen. The next one is imagery, not explanation. So with a short story, you're going to focus a lot on very detailed, vivid description. I've written a lot of stuff about how to do description well in Bookcraft, which is my bigger main book on the craft of writing. But basically you want to focus on the differences of the scene. So rather than, when you're talking about a high school classroom or whatever, everyone automatically assumes they have a picture in their head about what a high school classroom looks like. So rather than describe a typical high school classroom, which is just what they expect, you want to point out details that make it unique or different, especially if it hints towards characterization or personality or mood of your particular story. But you don't want to explain the backstory, the politics, the motivations, what's actually happening. You want to just hook their attention with really clear, specific imagery and interesting imagery. Also in a short story, you'll end with unresolved conflict, which means in a full novel, you can try to wrap things up. You kind of want to have you want something to happen. The short story should build until a crisis point where something dramatic or surprising happens, but you don't need an epilogue where everything wraps itself up. Ideally, in a very good short story, all of the clues will be present already. So when the thing happens, it will be surprising, but they can guess what actually happened. Or if it's not completely obvious, it's semi-obvious or sort of plausible. The things that you set up didn't play out the way that readers expected them to, but they kind of get it. Or it leaves them with questions of what possibly could happen. It's a little bit open-ended, and people can kind of think about things, especially if you're going with a series like I mentioned earlier. The challenge is, in one of my other series, I did a prequel where the prequel was like centuries in the past, and it set up the current world of the main series. So I had totally new characters and plot events and everything. It did, it had a really dramatic Semiresolution, a kind of a tragic semi-resolution. A lot happened in 15,000 words, and it was good. It was short, but because it was sort of resolved, if they liked the world and the world building, the main series sort of continued that same world centuries later, but it wasn't very direct. So you want to be careful not to do a prequel or a short that's completely devoid from your main series, or there would be less of a reason to read through it. So what I'm trying to do in this one, it's her mother's unresolved story. So if I do it well, the readers will want to know what happens because it ends on a really big cliffhanger, but my main character won't know what happens either. So I can't give away too much, or there won't be any mystery, or the readers will already know what happened to her mom. But I do want to make it really dramatic so that it leaves story questions that will be resolved through the series to make it really satisfying. Then also I wrote here, you need to confirm and expand genre expectations. And I'll give you an example in a minute of the things that I'm playing with as I try to kind of brainstorm this short story. You want to give them all the normal things, especially in the first 500 words, which is the sample, but it's also just the first scene of the short story. You want to let readers know they're in the right place by hitting all of the tropes, cliches, whatever, that are associated with urban fantasy. So they recognize this as a strong urban fantasy story, but then you want to subvert or expand genre expectations. So you can't just, like, even if I include all of the stuff that is typical of urban fantasy, it'll just read like every other urban fantasy book, and I want mine to be different and unique. So it has to transcend the genre expectations. I have to put them all in there, but then I have to think of a, bigger, more dramatic, more powerful way of showing things so that it's clear that my story stands out and it's not just more of the same. And like I mentioned, I'm shooting for a 500 length first, which has to be really strong and powerful, and then also a 7,000 word length, which has to have a semi-resolution. This first 500 words, I want to end on a really hard cliffhanger because I'm just trying to prove to the judges or the editors that if they read the first 500 words, they will want to keep reading and find out what happens next. If you don't already have their attention in the first 500 words, then it's sort of a failed story because they're not going to be engaged with it. And this is sort of a rule of thumb. The bigger the audience you have, the more famous you are, the more patient readers will be with your story. So if they like you and trust you, they will believe that you can take them to a satisfying resolution. They might be willing to read 20 or 30 pages that are really slow because they know that eventually it'll build towards something. But if you're a new author and they don't know you at all, after the first couple pages, they might just quit or skip ahead to other stories that are catching their interest better. You really need to hook them hard very early, which is why this anthology is requiring the 500 word submission rather than the first story. They're going to have to vet, hundreds of samples to find some good ones. It saves them a lot of time rather than considering each 7,000 word submission in its totality. They're only focusing on the first 500 words because they know they want this to be a gripping, fast-paced type of urban fantasy anthology. So let me scroll down and show you some of the details that are not really fleshed out yet. These are just some ideas. So I mentioned this was kind of the main premise I'm going towards. And then I set out some basically pictures or scene ideas. So specifically what I want readers to imagine in their minds. I have blood, tears, torn jeans, fight, conflict, stopped by an ex or a lover. She's married, she's an angel hunter, but she gets kicked out because they think that she is an evil fallen angel. And so she'll probably be up against her peers or even her husband. One of them might even betray her, but I think I'm going to leave that kind of open-ended. So she's escaped, she's on the run, she might get captured again, or she has to fight her way out. I've got an image of something I found when I was looking on stock photos was a girl in a pink dress with a studded leather jacket. I think that works really cool for like an angel hunter urban fantasy story. So I'm probably going to have something where she is not used to living in the human world, so she goes in the human world and grabs random clothes. So that's why she has a dress. Or maybe it's her wedding dress because it's her only human clothes she has and she thinks she'll blend in, or something that's just a little bit weird. There's never really a good reason to make girls wear dresses in fantasy. And in urban fantasy, like in epic fantasy, you want a girl in a ball gown on the dress. That's kind of part of it. For urban fantasy, generally they're wearing studded leather jeans or leather pants, leather jackets, more like biker stuff, which is fine. But like, I don't have to put a dress in this story, but I probably will, because that's a little bit more my brand. I tend to write more urban fantasy stuff, more epic fantasy. She also has these glowing angel marks on her arm, like brands. Those are the source of her powers. And she might have something dark rippling under her skin, like a poison, just because it's a cool visual image. I don't know exactly how I make that make sense later, but I don't really need to make everything make sense. I just want to focus on very powerful scenes. You want to open the weirdness. You want something visually stunning that hints towards questions like what's actually happening with her, what's going on. Other things I've considered for this short story, there's basically a bunch of supernatural creatures, which is typical for urban fantasy. I probably don't want her fighting like all of these creatures in the first battle scene. That's too much. But I can have her very early on reference some of the creatures so that readers know that they exist in this universe. She'll probably meet a couple of them, maybe a fae and a witch and a vampire or something. And she'll be hunted by the winged angel figures. They're not really angels, but they're winged flying demon hunters. I probably won't have her fighting dragons, but she can mention she has a fear of dragons. They might pop up later in another scene. I also want to include something like Gothic Churches. It's common for, like I said, I wanted gritty urban fantasy. I like to have a lot of gritty urban decay, so it might be like a, falling apart, abandoned church with stained glass windows. I also thought about having like a car or a bus chase. She does have wings and she has some magic. I thought about adding a motorcycle, which is pretty common for urban fantasy stuff. I basically want to make this, as cinematic as possible. So I want everything to be bigger and more dramatic, but I also want it to be unexpected. I can't, like I mentioned, I can't just have a typical fight scene with supernatural creatures. I want this story to really stand out and define sort of a new genre. So I have to take everything up a notch to another level. I thought about, for example, even in the first scene, I thought about ending like this for the first 500 words. She gets captured or she's running away. She finds, she gets knocked out or has to fight some of the supernaturals. They capture her and then they ask, are you ready for what the truth? Because finally she's going to get answers. That's not a terrible ending, but it's not that great either because it's sort of vague and it's not visual. So I haven't built up the story enough. I haven't had the space, the time to develop the story questions so that readers will care about whatever the mystery or whatever the truth is. It doesn't matter yet because we don't know these characters or this world yet. To hook them in the first 500 words, I really just have to have a really powerful action scene, sort of. So what I might do is something like she steals a motorcycle and she's fighting with a dragon. The dragon picks her up on her motorcycle. Rather than just rather than seeing a stained glass window, like she goes into a church with a stained glass window, which is really passive, I could have her being thrown through the stained glass window and, she opens her wings, but she falls. So she's inside this church with her wings out and broken colored glass all around her. That's a very strong visual scene to end the first 500 words. So I'm not answering any questions. I'm not really doing any dialogue. It's just, I want readers to be stuck with this image in their minds and thinking, what happens next? What's going on? Who is this girl? Why is she fighting all these people? Why are her own kind, fighting against her? Just a lot of open loops or open story questions and very strong visual images. That's probably what I'll do for the first 500 words, which isn't very much. Then I'll do a little bit more story building, give a little bit more information about the background and the world. Like I said, I have to be careful not to ruin any of the surprises that are going to come out in book one. So it has to, I may not go into the full explanation of everything and how the magic system works and the 7 different kinds of angels and powers or anything like that. But just kind of a general setup of the world and the chief sources of conflict that are already going to be explored in greater detail in the first book. I don't want to touch anything that I won't reveal until books 2 or 3 because I don't want to ruin the surprise. So, for example, for the end of this 7,000 word, this will probably include the death of her mother. Because we already know that her mother's dead, we already know in book 1 pretty early on that she died in battle. That's all we really know. So I can show the death of the mother. I just can't show how exactly it came about. So somewhere between the beginning scene and the end of the 7,000 words, I will have something happen where somebody corners her, she recognizes them, she says something like, "It's you," her eyes widen in surprise, someone stabs her with a spear and she's bleeding out, and that's the end of the short story. It's a very powerful short story. It's not satisfying at all because it doesn't answer anything. I might have enough clues early on, depending on how I'm going to play it. But it's definitely going to be open-ended where we don't know if it was her, her lover or her husband or her best friend or peer or the vampire lord. We're not going to know exactly who killed her. It's going to be an open mystery, but it's going to be a really gripping murder scene, basically, that's also really visually stunning. So maybe she gets killed by one of the glowing angelic powers. Each of the 7 archangels have a magical rune and a magical weapon, basically, that's kept by these demon hunters. So I can share some of that. I can set up a really cool death scene or final battle scene. But I want the death to be sudden and surprising too. I want her to be on an urgent mission to uncover the truth, but in that mission, she gets killed. And I want to have some mystery. So maybe even like she goes back into her school. She sneaks back into her school that she's been kicked out of as an angel hunter to steal something, and then she dies in the school. So we don't know who killed her, but we know there's some conflict between the events of book 1 where her daughter is going to think, and I'm just thinking of it actually now, but if I'm writing this short story, her daughter has to already be alive before she dies. So she needs to have an infant daughter before she dies. Maybe that adds to the conflict of the drama where her husband is, she was forced to leave her daughter behind. Maybe she goes back to rescue her or to save her or something. That's something else I have to add in because otherwise it's not going to make any sense later. But what I was going to say, is that if she sneaks back in the school and she dies in the school, it means that someone in the school killed her, which is different than the story her father is telling the main protagonist of the main series about what happened to her mother, because she's been told that she died in battle. So when readers read book 1, if they've read the prequel, they're going to immediately pick up on the dissonance and the conflict, which is great because it just creates this suspense and a little bit of skepticism, but like a healthy skepticism where they know something is wrong. They feel something is wrong. They know that she's been lied to. The shoe is going to drop eventually when she's going to find out the truth, but they don't know what the truth is or who actually killed her mother, things like that. So that's actually a really good way of using a short story or a prequel, is to create instant conflict going into the main series by showing something readers already know is a lie or doesn't match with what happened in the prequel, so they feel this discomfort or disconnect. You also have to assume that not everyone's going to read the prequel. I mean, in the main series in book 1, that it has to stand alone by itself without a prequel because most readers won't read a prequel. Although having a prequel is a really nice move because I can use it for list building. I can use it to put on Instant Freebie or Story Origin and join joint author promos to build my list in order to sell book one of the series. I can make it perma-free, but I could also put it at the end of book one so that I could offer it as an opt-in bribe. So rather than, if they read book one, I can say sign up and read the backstory prequel about the whatever, her mother's death. I'd have to make, that really good and really clear about what the thing is. And I would rather they just continue to read book two right away if it's already ready. But like if you don't have book two out already, you could write a short. This particular short, it's got to be 7,000 words. I can write 2,000 or 3,000 words in a day, so this will take me 3 or 4 days, a couple days of editing, which is enough to meet the deadline. If I don't get accepted into this anthology, that's fine too. I can always use a strong prequel short story in relation to a completed series. This is a series I'm working on this year that I hope to have out potentially this year, all 3 books. So it's a good time to focus on developing this little prequel. It's also just kind of a little bit of a break. It's difficult to write a full novel. It takes a lot of work to edit it and to make sure it all makes sense. You're a little more free in a prequel short story because it doesn't all have to make sense. You're not trying to wrap up all the loose ends. You're just trying to open loops and open story questions to get readers invested into your characters and your world so that they want to keep reading within the context of that world or universe that you've set up. So mostly I just want to focus on, making this full of action, full of conflict and drama, really great scenes, and a lot of open story questions. I think it's going to be pretty strong. I don't know for sure it's going to get accepted into an anthology. It's also just kind of motivating to apply for anthologies because it's a deadline you have to meet. It's a chance to have a break and to focus on something different. It's short, so it can be sort of a respite from the longer works. And it can be a little bit more creative because I can just kind of play with, I'll be thinking bigger. Like I said, with my novel, I tend to do very slow build novels where the big dramatic stuff doesn't happen until the end of the book. But in a short, you want the big dramatic stuff to happen really fast, really quickly. So, like I said, a jousting a dragon on a motorcycle or something similarly badass like that for an urban fantasy would be a pretty strong hook for the end of the 500 words. And then a death of a main character at the end of the 7,000 words is sort of a semi-completion because obviously that story is finished. This is the death story of that character, but it's only the beginning of, the baby infant that she left behind to be taken care of by those angel hunters. So I think that's a pretty strong start. If you're writing a short story, if you have questions about short stories, let me know in the comments. If you have any other questions about writing in general, check out my YouTube where I have tons of videos and resources about the craft of writing. Thanks, bye-bye.